Good afternoon, everyone. Just ignore that it says the 13th of March on that slide. It absolutely is not the 13th of March. I can confirm it is the 10th of March, so that is an error. So we started well. I apologise. It's Monday, the 10th of March, and welcome to this Lunch and Learn sessions. We're having a look very quickly today at specification, evaluation criteria, and answering quality questions. We've got a few people booked on today, so I'll just do some housekeeping and intros whilst we get started. So I am Gillian Askew. If you've been to one of these before, you might know me already, but for those that are new to us, I'm one of three co-founders of Go for Growth. Go for Growth is here to support businesses who wish to grow sustainably in the public sector, regardless of size, but generally speaking, we're supporting lots of micro and smaller type organisation. The session is being recorded today, so a copy of both the slide deck that I'm using and a recording will go out to all registered attendees within the next 48 hours. So hopefully by close of business tomorrow or this week, just because I'm traveling a little bit, it might be Wednesday this week. So, but within 48 hours of this session, that will be out to everybody. And you will be able to find the recording on our YouTube channel as well. Please do feel free to ask questions throughout. So I have carved out a little bit of time. It is a 30-minute session today, so it's a bit of a quick fire session. But if you have any questions, if you can pop them in the Q&A or the chat functionality, if you did want to say hi and introduce yourself in the chat, you'd be more than welcome to do so. So I'm going to cover core parts of the tender process, specification, evaluation criteria. I'm going to look at some mechanisms of how to approach answering quality questions. And so we'll break down that structure of the question and have a think about how we can structure our response back and relate it back to spec and evaluation criteria. So first thing just to say, just a reminder of generally the stages that are included in a public procurement. So you can find opportunities on both Find a Tender Service and Contracts Finder. The Find a Tender Service is what is now more commonly known as the Central Digital Platform. So from the 24th of February 2025, we are governed, any procurements that are let after the 24th or on or after the 24th of February will be regulated by the Procurement Act 2023. That's the legislation that will be in place. Anything that was let before that will continue to be governed by the Public Contract Regs of 2015, the European regulations. However, from the 24th of February, the Find a Tender Service became the Central Digital Platform. And effectively what that means is you can continue to search for opportunities that are above threshold. I'll give you those thresholds in a second. But you can also register as a supplier there, and you would need to register as a supplier if you want to bid for an opportunity, and you can enter some supplier information that will pull through to those bids. For opportunities that are below that value, you can continue to use Contracts Finder. Generally speaking, Contracts Finder would be utilised in central government departments above 10,000, 12,000, including VAT, or in wider public sector, generally speaking, above 25,000 plus VAT. The thresholds at the moment of where Find a Tender Service kicks in, the Central Digital Platform for supplies and service non-central government, so wider public sector, is 214,000, 904,000. For works, it is 5,372,609. And there is something called the light touch regime, which is often used in things like social care contracts. The threshold is 663,540. All of those values are inclusive of VAT. And I have talked to a number of public sector contracting authorities who are considering whether to use the Find a Tender Service for below threshold opportunities. So you might also start to see some below threshold opportunities on there. But typically those are the two government provided free search engines that you would use. You can also search on procurement portals once an opportunity is advertised. There'll be a period of clarification. So once you have found an advertised opportunity, you will download all of the documents and have a read through. It's important to note that there is a period of clarification. So that's the period in which you can ask questions that you might have about the tender opportunity. It will be almost certainly a time-sensitive process, so there will be a closing date for when you can upload clarification questions. There might also be a closing date of when you'll get responses to those questions. Once you have been through all of the documents, you have written your bid, you will then submit it and it will go into evaluation. It will be scored. I'm going to talk about evaluation criteria today. Once all of that scoring has been done, depending on the type of procurement that it is, if there are winners and losers, then there will be an intent to award. And that's when you will get your feedback process kick in. So there'll be an intent to award and winners and losers will be notified. You'll get your feedback. Under the Procurement Act above threshold, you get something called an assessment summary, which should give you your score versus the winning score and some detailed enough feedback so that you can see where it was that you weren't successful. And then above threshold, you would enter into a standstill period. So the standstill period has just changed for Procurement Act. So it is 8 working days standstill period following the publishing of the contract award notice. And that 8 working days, at least, it might be more, but at least 8 working days, excuse me, would start on the day that the contract award notice is published. There is an opportunity then when you've had your feedback to clarify some feedback, or if you think the process hasn't been run fairly or transparently, or if you think the result is incorrect for any reason, then in that standstill period, you can, of course, notify the contracting authority that you wish to challenge the result. Assuming that standstill continues through, then award will be made of contract. So those are the basic stages in the tender process. So we're going to think about specification first. We'll dive into it a little bit more. I mean, it sort of does what it says on the tin, the specification. It might also be called a statement of requirements. So some authorities do use that terminology, statement of requirement, but basically it is a written down specification of what the contracting authority wants to buy, but also what's important to them. So it's a crucial document in any bid. Our advice, and certainly our approach in Go for Growth, is that one of the first things we do is read through the specification thoroughly, and we would use that to make a note of any questions that we might have for the clarification process. Also making a note of any evidence that we have that relates to the specification, but also would make a note of any gaps that we might have in that specification. Fundamentally, excuse me, if we are successful in our bid, then it's that specification that the contracting authority is looking to deliver through this contract. So if we have gaps and we think they're material gaps, or it would risk our ability to deliver the contract and the specification as a whole, then it's worth noting that and actually using that gap analysis to work out whether you would want to go on and bid it or not. There would need to be fairly substantial gaps, however. And when we're completing quality or technical questions, as they're often called, what we're a bit like a big job application, we are effectively going to use the specification to show the contracting authority that we're bidding for how we can deliver against that specification. And it's worth noting that any questions that we're asked, those quality and technical questions, have to refer to the specification. My understanding is that if we're asked a question in evaluation that doesn't relate to the specification, it can be challenged under something called undisclosed criteria. So that specification is so important because it's what effectively we're going to be tested on. And you might see in lots of contracting authorities that they actually physically refer you back to the section of the specification that the question refers to. Not all of them do that, but some do. So that's what the specification does. That gives us a real starter for 10 on what we're going to be required to do. The other key document in any bid is evaluation criteria. So every competitive process will have effectively 2 sorts of criteria. Selection criteria, which is looking at the business and how you're structured and what you've been doing and your financial and economic standing. So it will ask you about your insurances, what contract experience you've got, It might ask to look at your accounts, etc. You'll look at your licenses, accreditations, etc. It'll be looking at the business and that standing of the business. The evaluation criteria is very specific to this contract. And so evaluation criteria, scoring criteria has to be transparent. So each procurement competition will tell you what the scores are and how those scores are made up. So it might be 0 to 100 or 1 to 5. There's usually 5 or 6 different scores that you can get. And it might be excellent or unacceptable, top to bottom, that kind of thing. But each of those scores will have a definition of, so if excellent or 100 or 5 is the top score, it will tell you what would need to be included, what they're looking for. So it will say excellent understanding of the specification and criteria, more evidence than was required, that kind of thing. So it will tell you what the definition of that score is for each score in the list. So you can use that to try and tick off, have I met expectations, exceeded expectations? Have I got enough evidence in? Have I got more evidence in? Have I, have I demonstrated my understanding of the question? That kind of thing. That scoring criteria is really useful because you can test yourself a little bit in terms of whether you're meeting the criteria or not, and what you can do to fill those gaps. There may be something called a threshold question, which means there is a minimum score, or it might be pass-fail, in order for you to continue through the rest of the scoring process. So keep an eye out for those things. There'll also be weightings in there. So if there are 5 questions and 100% of marks, for example, they might be split equitably at 20% each, but it's more likely that you will have some with higher weightings than others. And that can be super helpful, actually, for us to be able to know where we need to put our efforts and where we need to focus the most. So if we've got 5 questions and one of them is scoring 50%, then we know, and everything else is scoring 10%, we know that that 50% question is the one that we really need to get the best scores on because it's got the highest weighting. Now, I'm not saying that we would try necessarily any less on the others, but if we have finite resources, it can often be helpful to look at those weightings because they give us an indication of what the contracting authority thinks is the most important. And in terms of answering questions, so I've got an example of this on the next slide. So each question will have what I call verb elements. So they'll have the doing elements of the question. But there are some things that it's going to feel super obvious when I say it, but we need to only answer the question that's asked. So we have some behaviours. I think it's an interesting environment bidding. We might want to repeat the question and then answer it in our answer. We don't need to do that. They know what the question is. But there might be something that we really want to tell the contracting authority, but if it doesn't relate to the question, our advice is be as succinct as possible. Our job as bidders is to answer the question that is asked of us, and no more, no less, really. So although we can do that exceptionally well to score higher, what the evaluation criteria is not looking for is that we've actually gone off at a tangent and given them a whole set of extra information that bears no resemblance to the question. That bit isn't going to give us any more scores. The evidence that we give and the depth in which we answer the question will help us gain more scores, but additional information that doesn't relate to the question will actually probably do the opposite. It might lose us scores. I can't stress enough how evidencing answers as much as possible. And no matter how often you bid, it is super difficult to always do that. So I've been an evaluator for many years, and I remember scoring a question on modern slavery, and the answer opened with, "We are world leading at answering modern slavery questions." And I thought, amazing, this is going to be great. But what it didn't do was give me any evidence around that. So it gave me a really positive opener, but then it didn't evidence the answer. And so I actually had to reduce scores in line with the scoring criteria because the evidence wasn't there to back it up. So the question we ask ourselves all the time is, so what? How have I shown you that? If I say I do something or I'm going to do something, can I show you how I've either done it or how I will do it? How do I evidence that as much as possible? And the key that we're trying to do here is we're trying to give the evaluator confidence that we can deliver that specification. And we can deliver that specification throughout the life of the contract. So that's what we're doing. So, and it's the evidence that gives us that. And we don't have to have done it before, because this is looking at how we will deliver this contract. So we can use evidence of where we've done similar or the same things in other areas. But if we haven't done it before, if we're a new startup business, for example, that monitoring environment, that compliance environment, if we say we're going to do something, how will we make sure that we do it and we do it to the level that is needed and that we've said we'll do it? What's our infrastructure that we wrap around that? That will be our evidence. Also, and again, it's going to sound super obvious, don't forget to provide any documents specified, but the amount of evaluations I've done where that, and the amount of bits I've written for my own organisation where I've checked, and I think I've double checked, and it's not until I've asked a colleague to check something that they've said, where is this document? And I've gone, oh my gosh. So if you're asked for an implementation plan or copies of insurance certificates or whatever it is, double check, triple check, and if you can, ask somebody independent of it. I think there will be a technical term, I'm sure, but we get so close to it, we're almost too close to it. So it's in your head that you've uploaded it and you almost see something that isn't there. So anything you can do to double check and tick off those things that we need is well worth it. The other thing to say is there will often be constraints when we're answering questions. So either a word count or a page count. If there's a page count, there will normally be a font size specified. So it might be 2 pages of A4, both sides, font size Arial 12. And those things will be checked. So they're called governance checks, and they will be checked before they go into evaluation. If you have gone over your word count, for example, so if it says 500 words, if you go over it, anything after 500 words will be redacted. The evaluator won't see it. If you go over the page count, the same. If it says 4 pages of A4 or 2 pages of A4 both sides, and you deliver 3 pages of A4 both sides, the last 2 pages won't be seen by the evaluator. And as much as it might sound extreme, if you adhered to the page count, but you used font size Arial 8, so you could put more in there, you could in fact be disqualified because you have not used the font size, and you would have an unfair advantage over other bidders because you were able to get more words in. So, you know, the top tip, I guess, is don't exceed any of those constraints. If it says there's a page count and a font size and a word count, make sure that you adhere to them. They will be checked. And so this is what I mean about answering questions. So they are real questions from a real procurement. And what I've done, there's just 3 of them. There were obviously more in the tender itself, but these are ones that I used to train from. And effectively, there are 3 of them. What I've highlighted in yellow are what I've called the verb elements, the doing elements. So in that first question, the question's asking us, how do we ensure that care plans are individually tailored, person-centered, and meet the needs and outcomes of the person? And within the answer, we're asked to state how we ensure that care plans are kept up to date, and what measures we have in place to ensure that people are involved in their care planning, and how we link with partners to ensure needs are met. So there's 6 doing elements of that question. And we have 600 words, no attachments allowed, and we know it's the most important of the 3 because the weighting is at 25%. It's higher than the other 2. So we can, when we write our answer, we can tick off each of those 6 bits. So when we write our answer in terms of how we ensure care plans, we need to look for those words that explain how they're individually tailored. What are those words that explain how they're person-centered? What are the words that explain how we meet the needs and outcomes of the person? How are we showing that those care plans are kept up to date? How are we showing those measures that we've got that mean that people are involved in their care planning, and how we link with partners to ensure that needs are met? We should be able to fundamentally see those 6 parts of the question in our answer. And that effectively will be what the evaluator's looking for. And so when we've written, here is how we keep and make sure our care plans are individually tailored, if in the specification, it will talk about individually tailored care plans. So you will see what the contracting authority is looking for, and you can link back to that specification, and you can provide evidence of either what you have done or what you will do in order to make sure that the specification is met and that those care plans are individually tailored. So we're using the scoring criteria. We want top marks. It tells us what top marks looks like. We've got the specification and we've got our question, and we can tick off those individual elements of each question. In the second one, it's scored at 15%, so it has a lower weighting, 200 words, so less words, still no attachments allowed. 3 parts of that question. How do we seek feedback about how the service might be improved, and how do we evidence that feedback is acted upon? And we can do the same again with our 200 words. Have we ticked off how we seek feedback, how the service might be improved using that feedback, and how we evidence that the feedback is acted upon? And then the third one on there is for information only. It's not scored. We have 100 words, 2 doing elements to it, participation in the local community, and how do we get others involved with our service? Now, if we've got a finite amount of time, we will obviously prioritise question 1 and 2 because they're scored. And that's not to say that my advice is you can put any old stuff in question number 3. That's not what I'm advocating at all. But I am saying it's okay to be proportionate with our focus and our resources, because we know which is the best chance of getting the best scores. Question 1 has got the most weighting, question 2 has got a secondary weighting, question 3 doesn't have a weighting at all. It is only for information. It's not going to be scored. So I have seen examples of question 1 where the answer was yes, we have care plans. And so, of course, that isn't answering any of that question, and is likely to get the lowest possible score because it is unacceptable and it hasn't met the needs of the question. It hasn't answered the question. So, and that feels like a very extreme example, but I've seen those examples in lots of bids where actually we confirm that we do all of those things, but we don't tell you how, and we don't give you examples, and we don't evidence it. So it's really important to do that. Other thing to remember is, I talked about actually if we're successful in our bid, that specification is effectively what the contracting authority wants delivering. What we write down in our bid submission is effectively what we'll be on the hook for. So if we say we do it this way, then that's the way that we will be expected to do it if we are successful in winning the contract. That's not to say that we can't improve things and we can't develop over time, but fundamentally, if we say this is how we keep our care plans up to date, this is how we evidence feedback being used, this is how they're individually tailored, that will be what we're expected to do when we get in there. So there's lots of talk on using artificial intelligence in bids at the minute. In fact, I'm running a workshop next Friday on it. Personally, I don't think there's anything wrong with using tech to help us, but we have to be absolutely certain that the information that we submit in the bid is a fair and accurate reflection of how we work, that we're not blatantly plagiarising something that we shouldn't, and we fall foul of any copyright or IP infringements, intellectual property infringements, and that if we were going to win the bid on the back of what we've written down, that we can in fact deliver that. So there's a really good test in answering questions of this is how we do it, how we will do it, we're happy with that, it's fair, it's accurate, it's our own words, and we are happy to submit that. So last thing just to say, we know that bidding can feel like a lonely and isolated place, especially if you're a small business, micro organisation, sole trader. There might be only you. Help is on hand. We can help you. We don't do bid writing or bid review, but if you've got a question, you've written an answer to it, and you would like me to read it through, I'm always happy to do that, as are my colleagues. So please do feel free to reach out if we can't be of any help. My contact details are on there, as is our generic email address. There's lots of support on our website as well, so please feel free to go to our website. You can see our events, and we have the Public Sector Supply Ready accreditation if that's helpful to anyone as well. And if you would like to stay in touch with us, we say this on all of our events. You can sign up for our newsletter. Our latest one has just gone out, and it has prompted a request for support from a provider. So hopefully they are useful updates. We just do them monthly, but of course you can opt out at any time. And we have 5 minutes left, so I will stop sharing my screen, but hopefully that has been a useful update, albeit a whistle-stop tour, and I'll stop sharing and see if we've got anything in questions or chat. Nothing that I can see in there at the minute. Let me have a look. So as a small business or sole trader, will we be marked down on evidence if we can't provide that of previous work? So the way that the public sector works is it is trying to be inclusive to all, including those businesses that are just starting out. So, for example, if in selection criteria, you might be asked for up to 3 contracts to show your capability, your past capability. If you're a new startup or you're diversifying your business, for example, and you don't have those contracts, or you might have been doing it but not via a contract, then there is an alternative. You can provide 500 words of your capability. So it's a narrative that you can provide if you can't evidence those contracts. And when you're in technical and quality questions, if you haven't done it before, your evidence will be how you will do it in the future. So in that care plan example, how do you keep your care plans so that they are individually tailored? If you haven't done that before, what you'll be evidencing is how you will make sure that they're individually tailored. So that might be a template, that might be an approach, that might be a policy that you've written. So your evidence will be one of 2 ways, or perhaps both. If you haven't done it before because you're new to it, your evidence will be about how you will make sure, and that infrastructure that you'll put in place to make sure that you can deliver what's required. So you would show, for example, how you involve partners in your work. You haven't involved partners yet because you're new to it, but you will be showing that you've thought about that. And so here is how we plan to engage partners. Here is an example of our partnership agreement that we've developed. Here are partners that we've identified. Our early conversations have shown us X, Y, Z. It will be that kind of thing. So the public sector is trying not to discriminate actually about whether you have done it before or not. And the opportunities should be as equitable and fair and open and as inclusive as possible. So your evidence will be built either on, I have done it, here it is, let me show you it, or I will do it, here it is, and let me show you how I will do that. Hopefully that helps. Where applications state you have been trading for X number of years, can you still apply and show evidence of how you would? Selection and evaluation are 2 different things. So you might have selection criteria that some businesses might not meet the minimum threshold. And usually, I don't know whether I've seen a length of trading as a part of a selection for X number of years. It might be that an opportunity is of a particular size, and so that there might be a minimum turnover threshold, something like that. But notwithstanding any of that, if you see something that you are unsure about, that's what the clarification process is there for. So if it was a trading number of years and they wanted 3 years trading and you'd only been trading for 1, you can ask a clarification question around why 3 years is required and why you are confident that even though you've been trading for 1 year, you can still deliver the contract, and can you apply for that? I can't recall seeing anything around trading years, but to the person who put that question on, if you've got an example of it, I would love to see that, and then I can work it through in a bit slower time. But always, even if you look at something and think, well, On Contracts Finder, for example, it might say suitable for SMEs or VCSEs. I'm a big fan of ignoring that, and actually me being responsible for determining whether I think my business can deliver that or not. And that's very different from selection criteria. But if you see anything in any part of a bid that you think, well, I think I can do it, even if I don't meet that criteria, then the clarification process is there to try and help you. There was a recent framework by one of the big public sector buying organisations that came out, and what they wanted were, they're called COTPs, so certificates of trading progress or something, I think it stands for. It was very specific that you had to have a certain amount of them per lot, and lots of smaller organisations just didn't have them. And the public sector, it was queried in clarification extensively. The contracting authority just said, no, we want you to have this. And so lots of people were disqualified. And so it does happen, unfortunately. But the intent of the public sector is to try and be as equitable and as inclusive as possible. If you've got any of those examples and you want to chat to me further, just give me a shout. We can have a coffee and a chinwag. I hope that's been useful. We are 1 minute over. I will let everybody go if you haven't eaten and have lunch, or crack on with your afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me today. We are looking at the legals next Monday. So if you want, we'll be talking from a practitioner's perspective about some of the main contract terms that you might see and chatting through those. And then we've got feedback coming up at the end of the month as well. So please feel free to join me for any of those if you want to, and have a good rest of your Monday, everyone. Thank you.